Okay, so let's begin. Natalie, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Lovely. So, welcome everyone to our conversation today about the trials and tribulations of fertility. Um, First of all, you were promised Eileen Burbidge. Unfortunately, she cannot make it since this is a webinar on fertility. I thought, we can be very transparent about the fact that she had been called away on one of those classic parenthood workhood clashes. She would have loved to be here, but don't worry, we have a multitude of events this summer as well in July, and she will be hosting several of those. So I'm sure she'll be looking forward to having more conversations with our guest and Natalie as well. But I'm delighted to step in for a conversation with Natalie Sutherland. Welcome. I'll hand over to you in a minute, but just by way of introduction, for those who don't know me, I run the people and operations functions at Fertifa. We're a benefits provider in the reproductive health space, and we work with employers to create inclusive and accessible workplaces for their employees. Our mission at Fertifa, which actually has begun in fertility and means fertility for all, is really providing access to everyone to reproductive health services. So we hope as we grow, we can gain in that mission. I'm also in the unique position of having been a chief people officer myself, and also, like many of us at Fertifa, having had my own trials and tribulations with the fertility journey. So hopefully I'm well placed to facilitate this discussion. But before I introduce our guest, who doesn't really need any introduction, but I will do so anyway, a few housekeeping points. So firstly, as you can see, this webinar is being recorded. And although the Q&A is anonymous, if you are participating, make sure you're not sharing any identifiable information to keep everyone privacy. The chat messaging is not anonymous. So if you are going to write in the chat, just be aware that your name will pop up, and we will be sending around a follow-up of the recording of this webinar after the fact. So introducing Natalie, I'm so excited to have you here today. So 3 things everyone should know about Natalie. First of all, you're a partner at law firm Burgess Mee. You head up the Modern Families Department. You specialize, among other things, in surrogacy, family forming. You have a lot of experience in LGBTQ plus as well. The second thing is you are one of the founder of the incredible, impactful podcast Infertility in the City. So super excited about that. And thirdly, very importantly, you are, correct me if I'm wrong, but the first appointed fertility officer in a company in the UK. So very excited to talk to you about that, because I don't think many people know what that means. So I can't actually do justice to the amazing things you've done. So I'm going to hand over to you now just to give us a few words about yourself, please.
Oh, thank you, Celine. That's really, really sweet. So I'm a family law solicitor. I do all aspects of family law, but specialise in surrogacy and fertility. It is my huge passion. And it's really an honour, actually, to help people create their families. And the podcast, Infertility in the City, we set up to talk about those issues that professionals face when forming their families through fertility treatment. So impact on career and things like that. So I think it's a really important conversation to have.
Yeah, absolutely. So important. And I think, what we're discussing here today, it's amazing we're talking about fertility, but I think the angle that we're trying to get at is specifically, the legal aspects around this, helping employees understand their rights, helping employers understand the frameworks that they should be operating with. We know that infertility is rising across the globe. I think a stat from the World Health Organization is that 1 in 6 couples will experience infertility in their journey in trying to conceive. And there is more awareness around it, but not necessarily practicalities in the workplace being implemented. So before we actually start, we wanted to do something different today. Hopefully, my tech skills won't let me down, but I'm going to launch a poll, if Zoom allows me, to try and answer one question, which should be appearing now. The question is, does your organization have fertility and family forming support in place? I think it's so interesting because we're often so surprised about how many of our companies who come to us at Fertifa really want to implement something but are grappling with how to begin introducing it. They don't know where to start. They have all the right I guess, muscles to want to implement it, but it's very complicated or confusing. And so I'm always interested in trying to find out. And look, we can see at the moment it's about 50-50 almost. 52% say yes, 39% no, and 9% I'm not sure. So how does that look to you, Natalie? Is that
I think that's much better than I was expecting. And I think that is to do with all of the work that you guys, that we are doing in this space. I think I'm hearing a lot anyway of law firms who are implementing these types of policies. Other types of companies, you've got Nikki Aiken MP doing work in this space as well, trying to get the law changed. So it's definitely a hot topic. So so I'm really pleased to see that that's a bigger figure than I was expecting.
Absolutely. I think that's so great. I don't know if it's biased in the sense that people joining this conversation maybe already one step ahead. And so we are polling an already interested group, but I think it's really, really great. We have 71% that have voted. So I'm going to end the poll now. But yeah, I think it's always good to get an idea for yourself in a company, understanding where your company is in its journey. But let's start. So obviously we're in June, it's Pride Month. So it's natural to think about LGBTQ+. It's natural to think about the alternative paths to parenthood, what they can look like. I mean, we know there is not a one size fits all. And there are many, many avenues to forming a family. I'm going to mention a few generally, but I would love to hand over to you after that, Natalie, to discuss in more detail. So one data point I have from the Children and Family Court is showing that demand for surrogacy has increased by 350% in the last 12 years in England and Wales. Demand for adoption is increasing for assisted reproductive technology. So taking into account, obviously, the traditional pathways, but also the alternative pathways to creating a family. From an employer's perspective, Natalie, how can we ensure inclusivity in the workplace? How can we ensure that our policies are practical, genuine to the workplace that we're in, and impactful?
I think, first of all, employers need to appreciate and understand that LGBTQ people will have these different paths to parenthood. It's not as easy as doing the deed. It requires a lot of thought, a lot of time, a lot of research, and usually a lot of money. So these are people that are purposefully creating their families, but having to use third parties or assisted reproduction, and therefore it's going to be more difficult. It's going to take more time, and it's just not as easy, basically. But also to understand that there is emotional impact on that. So if you take surrogacy, for example, surrogacy is popular with same-sex male couples because it's their way of being able to have at least one of the partners being biologically linked. But it is also a pathway for heterosexual couples who have gone through years of infertility, that haven't been able, for whatever reason, to have a successful pregnancy, and are using surrogacy. And these two groups of people come to surrogacy, with completely different backgrounds and therefore experiences. But they'll have this parental order process at the other end of it. So that is something that they're going to be dealing with, to be able to change the legal parentage. If you're going internationally, you're going to be having the exit process, trying to leave that jurisdiction. You may have to stay there for quite some time. That can impact on somebody's work. They may have to take extra time off to be able to be in this other country with their newborn before being able to leave. So that's just one example of these additional burdens that anyone go through surrogacy will have to go through. And then if you think about same-sex female couples, they will need sperm donation, and but there's also shared motherhood. So shared motherhood is where the one female will have the half of the IVF treatment to retrieve the egg, which will then be fertilized in vitro with a donor sperm, but then transferred not into that same woman, but into her partner. And then she will gestate the pregnancy and she will give birth. And that's quite a common way of same-sex female couples having children. It's their way of both being involved. It is more invasive than if it was just one having something like IUI, which is not so as invasive as IVF. But it's definitely, you know, it's a choice that some same-sex female couples will make. Again, that's going to involve fertility treatment, going out of the office or wherever their work is to have those various treatments. But also what I would want anyone choosing that route to understand is legal parenthood. So so in that situation, even though it's the baby will be biologically connected to the non-birthing mother, the birthing mother is the legal parent, and so they will need to know whether or not the biologically related parent is a legal parent, and that will depend on whether or not they're married. So so it's having that information as well before choosing how to conceive your children. That, as for me as a family lawyer, that's what I would want people to get that information.
Yes, so quite complex. Whether you're going through it for the first time and you're trying to look for research and find research, is there specific place that people can go, you know, apart from Google, that can find helpful information, or for employers to use to start researching this?
Well, as you guys, there's other types of fertility benefits providers that provide education. I would like to shout out to DAS UK and My Surrogacy Journey. They are sort of same-sex male couple, Mike and Wes Johnson Ellis. They run My Surrogacy Journey, but that is a surrogacy agency not just for the LGBT community. It's for everybody. There are other surrogacy agencies, Surrogacy UK, Brilliant Beginnings, COTS, Nappy Endings. So all of these types of agencies will be able to help intended parents on their surrogacy journey. There are various forums. Lots of us family lawyers that do this work, please come and see us, because it's not where you should cut your corners. I don't think you know, forming a family through fertility treatment, if you're LGBT, is, as I said before, expensive, but certainly getting that legal advice before conception can save you a lot of money down the long run, in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, of course, at Fertifa, you know, we have medical staff and nurses who love helping employees, accompanying them on their journey, getting information, knowledge, understanding what's right for them. So, you know, very, very happy to talk to people always. So that's very helpful. What about adoption specifically? Can we talk a little bit more about that, or any that you've seen there, or any insights that we have to share?
I mean, there are more same-sex couples now obviously been able to adopt. Adoption, it's not, you know, you hear lots of people say, why don't you just adopt? And it's just really, really annoying, even for, you know, for me as a sort of, you know, professional, rather than anyone just going through it. And adoption is, it's a long process. It involves a local authority. You're not necessarily going to get a baby, because you know, there just aren't that many being adopted out these days. You know, we have moved on since the, you know, when children out of wedlock was frowned upon. But there are lots of children that need families. So foster to adopt and adopting can be really, really rewarding, and it is the right path for some people. But it's just understanding the road that you're going down. You'll hear a lot about people talking about pathways and journeys, and you know, it's because it's the best analogy. It's not, you know, it's not as simple as A to B. There are lots of different bumps in the road along the way. So so adoption definitely is a path to parenthood. It obviously doesn't include the assisted reproduction side of things because there is already a child, but there's also the legal process at the end of it. So you are then making your adoption application so that you're extinguishing forever the legal parentage of the birth parents, and then replacing it with you or your partner. So that, you know, that's another legal process to go down, and something that employers should also educate themselves about.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Are there any legal updates or recent changes, you know, that people should be aware of in the UK specifically that have changed the landscape of surrogacy or adoption?
Well, the Law Commission has just announced their recommendations for surrogacy law reform, but that's not going to become law for quite some time, if at all. So they released their reform recommendations on 29th of March, I recall. But yeah, so the government has 6 months to do an interim response, 12 months to do a full response. It's going to require parliamentary time. So it's a long way off. Something that has recently changed is the storage laws. So being able to keep gametes in storage for up to 55 years, even if you are storing because of your social reasons, not your infertility reasons. So Progress Educational Trust, which is an amazing charity that deals with things like infertility, and I'm a trustee of that trust, campaigned heavily to be able to change the law on that, because it was discriminatory against people who were socially egg freezing or sperm freezing. So doing it not because they are prematurely infertile, but because they wanted to, for whatever reason. They could only store for up to 10 years, and that may not be enough time. Whereas if you were storing because you were potentially going to be prematurely infertile, for example, going through chemotherapy and that affecting your fertility, you could get up to 55 years. So that has now changed. So you can now store your gametes for up to 55 years. You do have to re-consent every 10 years, but there's no disparity now between the two reasons. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's so helpful. Thank you for sharing that. So you mentioned already a little bit the emotional impact that one can have going through these fertility journeys. So I want to talk a little bit more about what that can look like when you're going through treatment or trying to form a family, because it's such a huge impact. And when we work with clients or speak to employees directly, there's two things that, we know for sure. Once, as a manager or as an HR, somebody is coming to you, they probably have been going through this for quite some time. So it's not, the first day. And so a lot has already happened up to that point. And the second element is really that it's a very unseen journey. Sometimes people go through it, but you have no idea that they're going through it. But although it is unseen in a way, what's happening under the surface is something we can't ignore. So you've already mentioned the emotional side of things. We know that people going through fertility experience the same level of depression as people going through cancer treatment, for example. We've read that 1 in 4 pregnant people going through pregnancy loss will suffer from some sort of PTSD. So that's a huge impact on whether it's yourself or a partner or someone that's going through this. The second is obviously the physical aspect. If you're going through IVF, so all the early appointments, having to inject yourself, the side effects that we know, nausea, vomiting, and knowing as well that workplaces are not necessarily very well equipped to support people in that sense. And the third one you mentioned as well is the financial impact. So it's a huge financial burden to undergo this. The NHS is under immense strain. People talk about this postcode lottery. We know that private medical insurances often do not support family forming, and that you often have to go through several rounds. So it does get costly. So from your perspective, in family law or your experience speaking to people on your podcast, working with companies, how can employers set themselves up to be able to support their employees, whether it's, in policies or practical ways? If you can share with us what that looks like.
Well, the main thing I think is what we've done at Burgess Mee, which is appoint a fertility officer. So and that role came about because I shared my own fertility issues with my partners, and also that I knew that our younger junior solicitors were potentially going to struggle with that, and also knowing from sort of the years previously when I had a baby that there is always this fear about the impact it's going to have on your career. So and at that point, I wasn't even thinking about any kind of fertility treatment, because I was lucky and was able to get pregnant naturally with no issues until I tried again. But yeah, but if you add on to that an inability to get pregnant naturally and having to go through fertility treatment or suffering a miscarriage when you're at work, and these things that you're not going to shout about it, are you, until you've got that happy news. And you don't have to legally either. So there's a lot of people that will say things like, it's a private issue. Why are you talking about it at work? Like, this is your home life. Keep it separate. Work is for work, and that's it. And I wholeheartedly disagree with that, because fertility treatment and that wish and desire to have a baby when you can't is all consuming. And if you're still trying to hold down a job or pursue your career, you are going to you're going to struggle in one area of your life. It's going to impact. So and because of the statistics, because we know it's happening to so many people, you're going to know somebody in your organization that's going through this, but they might not be telling you about it because there is this shame and secrecy and stigma that nobody wants to talk about it. And the reason they're not talking about it is because from a female's perspective anyway, is this fear about impact on work, because otherwise you'd just be going around telling everybody what the issues were and not worrying about it. But there is that worry. So so what we wanted to achieve was a culture whereby the people in the firm would not feel like that, would not feel like they couldn't talk about it because it would impact on their career. And that kind of, I felt, needed to come from the top. It needed to come from partners. So because that's the only way you're going to create that safe space, because if you see a leader doing it or doing anything, it's you see that it's okay for you. So so having just discussed my issues and saying, well, you know, what can we do to improve this culture, that's when it was suggested that I be the women's officer. Okay, so that's how it started, women's officer, which at first I was like, of course I'll do that, no problem. I'm a huge women's health advocate, huge feminist, of course I'd do that. But afterwards I was like, I don't think this isn't sitting right with me, because this isn't, even though at the time, you know, we only had junior solicitors who were female, I was like, this is not a female issue. It really isn't. And to say that almost kind of puts it in that category where people don't really care, which I hate as well. But I wanted it to be an everyone issue, because it is. It impacts everybody, even if you're in a couple and it's a woman going through it. It still impacts, you know, the other partner. So so we changed it and called it fertility officer. And for me, it was like, great, we've got this in our firm, it's impacting our people. But then a friend of mine, Samaya, we got together, and that's when Infertility in the City was born. It was something that we wanted to bring to the legal community. So we had an event, and that's when I spoke about this role. And she's in recruitment and hadn't heard of anybody else doing it. And then after that, I got picked up by the press, and that's when this whole, you know, the first one in the UK. I mean, I don't know if anyone's done it before, but yes, it's really hit a nerve, because I think the important thing is having it, because there is this fear of whether or not you can trust your people to, you know, your managers to confide in them this very, very personal information, and just having that stress is just horrible. So if you know in advance, before you even need to worry about having children, that your company has thought about this as an issue for its employees and has put in place a dedicated person that, you know, is whether they're trained or whether they've got their own personal experience, but somebody that they can signpost to and say that, you know, we talk about fertility, that's the person you're going to go to. Same with like things like menopause or mental health, anything like that. If you have a dedicated person, you remove this line manager lottery, which I often talk about, this fear of whether or not you can talk to somebody. And from all the people that we speak to on the podcast, so many, it's the same reason why they're not telling their employer. And once they have told their employer, and you know, it's just a weight off, a complete weight off. And all those people that are supported by their employer have told me they'll walk through brick walls for them. So it is clearly something that people appreciate, and will then you know, have that loyalty to your firm. And like, you know, even now when we're getting people interviewing with us and everything, they've all heard about the work that I do, they've all heard about the fertility officer, and it's definitely working in terms of recruitment and retention. Absolutely. So yeah, so for me it's a complete no-brainer. It's having not just policies, and policies you absolutely have to have, I think, but having a person that is that person to go to.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think it's great that you had the trust of your manager and your leadership team to be able to go and open up. Maybe, you know, it's not the case in a lot of places.
Or might just be an oversharer.
Maybe. Yeah, and I know personally from going through, you know, a few pregnancy losses myself, you know, I felt very different in each of them. So again, it is a very individualized experience. But I really like what you say about the fertility officer. So if companies were to leave, you know, if people on listening to our conversations were leaving today and wanted to think of practical ways of electing a fertility officer, or, you know, writing a job description for a fertility officer, where does one start? You know, what does that look like?
Well, from what I know from speaking with all of my colleagues where I've been talking about it, the ones that are putting themselves forward for this type of role in their companies are the ones with the experience. So so when I've talked about it on the podcast at the events and things, and so I've been told that certain people who have had baby loss experience or fertility treatment going through it, not working, whatever, they're putting themselves forward. And I think that's really, really brave and really wonderful that you're having somebody that has that lived experience. So a lot of times in companies, you may find that person that's going through it that's strong enough, brave enough, whatever, to be that advocate. Okay. And it may be that nobody's talked about it, and you have this one person that stands up and says, well, I've been through this, I would like you to provide this type of support for everybody. And then suddenly you find out that so many other people have gone through it, they were just being really quiet about it. So sometimes it takes a brave person to put themselves forward. But if you are a forward thinking company, I think it's something that you should be putting in place. And I do think it does have its benefits to have someone who's gone through it, but you can't say that in a job description.
Sure. Ideally 3 to 5 years of experience trying to conceive.
Somebody in HR, if they're going to be if they're going to have this role, as long as people know who it is, I think that's the important thing.
That's so important. I mean, from my experience as an HR professional, I did want to raise something to you. How do you make sure that this is embedded within your companies? Because oftentimes maybe you have an officer or a champion for something and they end up leaving the company, and then the initiatives that are bound to that person leave with the company as well. So I guess from your experience as a fertility officer, or from speaking to other people, how can people make sure that it's embedded within the structure of the company for longevity?
Really good question, and it's one of the questions actually that I was asked in our accreditation. So Burgess Mee are the first company to have the fertility friendly accreditation from Fertility Matters at Work, and that was one of the questions they asked me. If you weren't there, Natalie, what would your firm be doing? And basically we are a small company, but it is such a well thought through policy, and we have a separate menopause officer as well, and the firm as a whole is really behind it. So so we have signposting to other third parties that might be able to help. They follow me on Instagram and things like that, and all the stuff that I share, the education stuff I share in the work. And also for example, helping someone go through something as traumatic as a miscarriage, for myself, who's also been through a miscarriage, it can be quite triggering. So, but I obviously still want to help that person. So, so what we're putting in place as well is training for the managers, essentially, to support the managers supporting the staff, because I think that's really important, because you can have vicarious trauma and things like that. So so we're putting those types of things in place, and and it's because it's so well accepted. We've won awards for introducing this role. It is supported by everybody. So if I wasn't there, the junior staff would know that they could go to Peter Antonia, that it's not just me, it's everybody, and that's the important thing.
That is so important. And I mean, you mentioned something about the manager, which is super important. I think research by Fertility UK showed that people going through fertility said that 70% of them were more impacted by their manager on their mental health than by their spouse or by anyone in their inner circle. So it is very important for people to get that training. And how does one begin to do that, right, is the next question, because there are so many different ways. It's not easy to train people around that. Do you have any more insight for people if they wanted to start the conversation of manager training around fertility? Where would they start?
Well, I think you guys do that as part of benefit, so having that type of education. But so Fertility Matters at Work, so when we did the accreditation, everybody did the e-learning course. And even if it wasn't something that was impacting them personally, there was a course for managers and a course for the staff generally. And it was really great to be able, obviously I'd gone through it, so I kind of knew, but the feedback I got afterwards was that for people who haven't gone through it before, it was really interesting. Now they understood. Now they can apply that learning to help not just their colleagues but their family, their friends, because this doesn't discriminate. It can impact so many different people, so it can only be a good thing that you're understanding how to be empathetic and understanding if someone needs to run off to an appointment, or somebody doesn't really want to see your baby when you bring them in because they're upset because of what they're going through. It's just understanding the basic human stuff to support people that are going through the shitstorm basically in their own life.
Absolutely. Or there's a baby shower, or whatever is happening in the company. That's again very good practical ways. Before we move to the legal portion, we do have a question. How do you maintain boundaries in this type of fertility officer role, which I think is a very interesting question.
Really good question. I kind of live and breathe this stuff, but sometimes I need to take a break. So I talk about it a lot. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I read about it a lot, and I used to speak about my own experience quite a lot, but I've kind of stopped doing that now. I don't want to have to relive that all the time. So, but there's definitely times where I just have to switch off. So I don't listen to anything fertility related. I listen to The Rest Is Politics or something like that, just something completely different. But yes, it is important to have those boundaries. You mentioned PTSD, and I think that would certainly, that has impacted me, and I can't go through it again. So and that is something that isn't there all the time but gets triggered. So yes, it's about, I obviously have to think of, and that's why we want to go through this this additional training, because I think that it's not just helping everybody else, it's helping us to help everyone else. When they say put your mask on before you help anyone else.
Absolutely, yeah. I was just going to say that, because I think sometimes it is okay to say no, if you don't have the capacity. And I think sometimes when you are a champion for something, you feel the burden of wanting to help everyone because you don't want them to have as bad an experience as you did. And so you say yes, 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 and then you do kind of run yourself down or burn out. So that is a very, very important question. And, thank you for sharing that. So, the reason that we're here, obviously, and that we have you here is because you have all this experience around family law. There's so many legals that we kind of mentioned at the beginning of our conversation. It is already a confusing time, no matter what path that you're trying to go through. I often see organizations like Pregnant and Screwed asking for volunteers who have CIPD level 7, who have family law experience, employment law experience. So it's just to show that people going through this just don't have enough access. Obviously, we at Fertifa love helping people as well, and we're here to help. But can we talk a little bit about people being unfairly treated? There is research from Pregnant and Screwed showing that 1 in 4 women going through fertility are unfairly treated. What does that look like? What do you see this workplace discrimination like from your experience?
So in terms of the fertility side, there's actually no legal protection for that. So for example, if you're pregnant and you're entitled to paid time off to go for your antenatal appointments, and if you're going through fertility treatment, you're considered pregnant at the time of embryo transfer, and it's at that point that any kind of maternity discrimination kicks in. Okay, but anything before that, there's no legal protections, no legal rights. So that is why I've been working, and Fertility Matters at Work have been working with Nikki Aiken MP, because she has introduced her private members bill, employment rights fertility treatment bill, to try and change the employment law so that anyone needing to go to appointments, and there are a lot of them, you have to go to these appointments at all different times of the day, at short notice often. It's at their beck and call, the clinic. It's not something that you can necessarily plan. And there are some employers so the research that lots of people have done is that people lie about it. So they you're going to go to these appointments, aren't you? You're going to go to these appointments because you want a baby, and that is very, very important to you, and of course it is. So you're going to go to these appointments, and unless you're being supported by your work to be able to freely say, I'm going through IVF treatments, I'm going to need this time off, can you be flexible, can you help me with that, can you pay my time off? If you're working for somebody that doesn't have the fertility officer role or the policies, and you're worried about that, you're probably going to lie. You're going to take holiday, you're going to take sick leave, but you're still going to go to these appointments. So your employer is still losing you at certain points of the day, perhaps not, without any kind of advance notice about it. It's because you've just gone off sick or whatever. So, but fertility treatment now, obviously, it's not a taboo like it was 40 years ago when it was just new. It is a standard way of creating families, and infertility has impacted so many people now that it's only going to get worse. We're only going to have more and more people using fertility treatment. So we're campaigning for the law to change, and also because again law changes takes ages. There's the Fertility Workplace Pledge, so I would encourage all employers to sign up to that, and that just promises to your employees, to the public at large, that you are considering this as an issue. You are going to be, you put in place these policies, you'll have a fertility ambassador, you will have flexible working. It just makes the workplace side of things easier for your employees when they're going through this. And what I'd really like employers to appreciate is the big picture, because your fertile years obviously intersect with your working years, and often with a woman it's as your career is progressing, and we've got this added pressure of fearing any impact on our career once we've had a baby, and then this additional fear if we're going off and having fertility treatment. But just understand that that women in your workplace is going to be better than no women in your workplace. So supporting women who have to go through, and it's not just women. I will say that. Yes. It's men as well. So even if it's the male factor, or the men are supporting their females going through it. But the reason why I keep saying women is because of that fear of it impacting careers. And I know from all the men that we've talked to, they haven't got that same fear, because they're the ones not carrying the child. So there are different sort of aspects that people are worried about. But certainly until the law changes, we are going to be battling against each individual employer, and an employee in each individual company is going to have to be looking at what their policies are. And what I also think firms should be doing is advertising on the website, so that anyone looking at your company or wants to come and work for you, they don't have to worry about asking things like, well, what's your fertility policy? What's your maternity or paternity policy? It's there already. And you're putting yourself, in the vanguard, I reckon, of people, and everyone's just going to follow suit, because this is the information people want. And your millennials, your Gen Z, all these people, they're expecting it. They're expecting it. So don't fall behind.
Absolutely. I mean, you touched on such an interesting point and I was watching a webinar with Indra Nui, the CEO of Pepsi, yesterday, where she talks about her career years and her family forming years being in direct conflict. And, how do you manage both if, like a lot of us, you're working and doing both? And I'm looking at your poster behind you that says, let's talk about flex, baby, right? So it's so important what you say about flexible working. So what we do advise is write that in your policy. If you're giving people flexible time around fertility treatments, understand, how that works, understand how many days people need, make it very, very clear. And if you don't know, and it's on a case-by-case basis, as you say, appoint someone that they can go and ask those questions to. And it's not often that complicated, but people don't know where to start. And I think, am I right in saying that starting anywhere is good, and then iterate as you're learning and as you're going around? What is your experience with that?
Definitely. So I don't think it's possible to really think about every single nuance of support that all these different people will need, because it's a unifying experience, but it's also a unique experience. Different people will need different things. So one policy is not gonna one size fits all, that type of thing. So what I would encourage people to see it as a living, breathing document, something that is constantly updated, so that and invite people to critique it, invite people to say, well, this is really good, but if you did this, it would be even better, so that they can, your line managers, everything can evolve, and it will just get better and better. But absolutely starting somewhere and putting something out there and inviting people to improve it as they go through their different experiences is definitely the way to go.
Absolutely. There's a question here, which was actually going to be my next question. So this is absolutely perfect. Thank you for teeing me up. But I mean, again, I think you were in a very fortunate company where there is a lot of buy-in to implement those changes. And I think sometimes some feedback that you might get from the CEO or from someone at executive level is like, oh, it impacts such a small proportion of the company. You know, is it really worth it? Or, you know, we don't have the budget or we don't have the time. So how do you go about getting that leadership buy-in for the fertility support for people to then start working with companies like us or doing policies or actually implementing practical things of we want to have a fridge so that people can put their injectables. Can I get sign off to buy a fridge? For example.
I mean, if it's a big company, if you think it's not happening, slightly deluded, because it probably is happening, just nobody's talking to you about it. So you know, understanding the stats and sort of, you know, multiplying that in your head, going, well, we've got this many people in our workforce, so if it's impacting 1 in 6 couples, 1 in 4 pregnancies are going to end in miscarriage, this is something that is going to, it can impact anybody. So that this is why I think it should just be something that all employers do across the board for that, just that reason, because it could impact, even if it doesn't impact anyone at all. You know, what if anyone in your company goes through it and you know, doesn't need any fertility treatment? What have you lost? You haven't lost anything, but you have created a much nicer culture for people to work in. They know that you would be supportive, and as I said before, if you advertise it as well, you're going to attract people that need this type of support through their work. And similarly, if you're a small company, and you might think that you don't have the budget for this, you don't really need a budget, I don't think. You know, this isn't a paid role. This isn't something that I you know, I do it because I'm very passionate about it, and essentially it's just me being a manager, which I was anyway in terms of being a partner in a law firm. But as I said before, it's the signal, it's the telling people that this is what you can talk to me about, and that can be anybody in your organization. But things like, I know, you know, a fridge, yeah, sometimes you might need a budget, but audit your company, you know, have some lunch and learns, have some education, gauge the interest, and if you're showing your company that this is something that they can freely talk about, I think you'll be surprised. I think you'll be surprised that lots of people will come out and say that they would like that support.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, whether it's engagement surveys or lunch and learns or using data, you know, just to show that you do need to implement those initiatives, I think it's always a first step to be able to open up those conversations. And we have a question here. As an HR manager, how do I start to open up conversations about pregnancy loss and other fertility health issues? It can be difficult to know where to start.
Yeah, of course, because it's a sensitive subject, but I think doing something like this and advertising these types of webinars in your company so that people can sign up and watch at their leisure, and then maybe, I don't know, feedback or whatever, or you setting something up, so having someone to come in. Sometimes people might not want to. I don't know, if you as a company say that you support this, and it doesn't matter who signs up to it, but you're producing this support, you're putting on the education, I think you'll find people will come. They will come, and if it's sometimes people might want, oh, I can't go to that, people think I want a baby, you know. But if it's across the board, and then it doesn't mean anything if you've come, but you're just educating yourself about how you can help colleagues and that type of thing, or have a small network. So you know, if you start off, I mean, baby loss, it's incredibly hard, and if you're having your first miscarriage, for example, and it's your first pregnancy, you may not have told your law firm, your company, that you were pregnant in the first place, because you don't have to until a certain amount of time. So that can be really difficult. But again, if you put that support in place first, don't wait for people to ask for it. Put it in place. It will help people in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just creating, I mean, I feel it's a word that's banded around a lot, but the psychological safety in the workplace, right? I think that's where it starts, and creating those paths where people can speak to someone they're trusting. Maybe it's not their manager, maybe it's not the HR person, but knowing that they can go to someone to share that, and maybe it's a fertility officer. Any insights on how to create that psychological safety? So one, we said, the leadership buy-in. Two, maybe being very clear in your policies, even if they're very nascent and young. What other practical ways would you suggest?
Get the training, I think.
Yes.
That is, that, as I said before, there's fertility treatment. It covers a wide spectrum of things, and you're not ever going to know everything, but getting in that education for everybody, I think, it just educates people on things that they may not think about, may not have gone through themselves, but then it helps them to it creates this much nicer culture where people can talk about it and get that support from their peers. So if you had someone that was a friend going through it, but you've never been through it, you might have said something quite insensitive.
Absolutely.
And I've definitely done that when I was younger, when it didn't impact me at all, and I would be mortified if I did that now. So it's just just tiny little things like that make such a difference.
Absolutely. And it's not just around fertility, but any other topics, and really you don't know what you don't know. So opening the door to those conversations is really the first step. So before we move to the Q&A portion, I just wanted to ask you, trials and tribulations and fertility, maybe two key. You gave us so many takeaways already, but if people left today remembering two things, what would that be from you, Natalie?
I would want people to use their voice. I have found that I didn't have a voice before, and I've definitely got a voice now, and that has come from me I don't know, just sharing and wanting to help others. So if you're that type of person, you can make a huge difference in your organization. If you are a manager, then go away and write a policy. Write a policy, instruct, appoint somebody to do it. Just get on and do it, advertise it. You won't regret it. It definitely it's going to be culture changing and potentially life changing for your employees. So yeah.
Absolutely. That's amazing. Thank you so much. So we will move to the Q&A. We've had a few questions come in already. I know we're nearing the end of our conversation. It's gone so quickly as these things go. So if you have a question, you can type it in the Q&A box. It will be anonymous. So feel free to do that. And I'll give it a couple of minutes to go. But I want to thank you, Natalie, for being with us today. It was very insightful. You're so authentic as well. So I think people really see that you have been through it and you understand, what it takes to implement this. So very, very, very good. I'm going to give it a couple more minutes. I'm sure people are hungry now, wanting to get some lunch. Okay. I don't think we have any questions at this point, so I'm going to close. So thank you all for coming. We at Fertifa are always so excited to talk to people, whether they're companies, whether they're employees, about how we might help them or if they want to share their stories, because the more stories we understand, the more situations we understand, the more we can be helpful. And so even if it's just to share, please get in touch. Again, Natalie, thank you so much. We look forward to having more of these chats with you over the summer. And thank you everyone for attending, and have a lovely day.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.